I am a representative of the castle, and I'm here to discuss castling. Castling refers to how the castle is contained within cell phones, shoes, people, factories, and surveillance cameras. The castle is in all of us. I don't know when the castle started, but I'm going to discuss an important moment in castling, Elmina Castle. Built in 1482, located off the coast of Ghana, which came to be known as the Gold Coast.
Hello everyone, my name is Astris Agunobi. I stay in Rayburn Terrace on Willcrest over here on the southwest side. I've been over here for 4 months. It is actually a pretty good area. It's pretty quiet. The kids come out and play on the weekend. It is individually owned. You have different landlords. Some of the rent can be a little high sometimes. Also, my grandmother stayed on West Belford. I actually was born on Creek Bend in West Belford. I've been over here for the last 21 years of my life. I'm 22 now. So yeah, the Southwest is a pretty good area. It's like my second home. I love it.
Before 1482, the Portuguese were trading with the people of Elmina. They were trading from small amounts of gold from the sea. Local traders would travel in small boats to the Portuguese ships floating far from the land's edge. The trading between the area of Elmina and Portugal grew.
It was so popular, people came across the country just to be a part of the business, and the trading grew even larger.
The Portuguese traded cloth that they brought from their homeland with the mined gold that they mined at Elmina. Gold is produced by the collisions of stars. Most of the gold that can be mined on the Earth was produced through asteroids hitting the planet 4 billion years ago. But the Portuguese could only acquire small amounts of gold with the trading at sea method, as the small boats could only hold so much gold. Building a castle as storage in the middle of the area would increase the amount of gold that could be traded and would provide security from foreign interests. I'm here for a site visit. This is the area where the castle is going to be built, about here. I'm here to try and persuade the community here to pay taxes to get this castle to be built here.
Maybe we need to just stick to trading at sea. Like, take control for once. Those castles don't need to be built here. Like, I know when I'm in control is when I'm doing hair, because I'm very creative. I can do what I want, and if the customer love it, it's even better.
Resistance. People who lived in Elmina stormed the castle whilst it was being built. We happened to be building the castle on an ancient burial ground.
And why they want to build it out here anyways?
Because it might bring us more trading opportunities and more jobs.
Makes sense, but what kind of jobs though?
True, like security and being a janitor and some workers. Like, people need jobs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. I just woke up this morning and I saw a lot of red bricks outside of my window. Archers, rafters, beams, arches, windows, and they're all in the middle of the houses.
once the castle was built and set up, it was in working order. The castle employed locals for various jobs inside of the castle, such as stocktake, for example. Over time, the castle became a form of cultural technique, and I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Culture derives from the Latin culture, which basically means cultivating soil in agriculture. Cultural studies focused more on the ideological aspect of culture, emphasizing feelings and values. For example, the cultural theorist Stuart Hall, whose work pioneered cultural studies as a field, looked at how culture reproduces stereotypes in media.
So the notion of something which images and depicts and that which stands in for something else, both of those ideas are kind of brought together in the notion of representation. Now, what this idea that media practices, among other things, represent topics, represent types of people, represent events, represent situations, what we're talking about is the fact that in the notion of representation is the idea of giving meaning. So the representation is the way in which meaning is somehow given to the things which are depicted through the images or whatever it is on screens or the words on a page which stand for what we're talking about. And if you think that the meaning that it is giving is very different from or a kind of distortion of what it really means, then your work on representation would be in measuring that gap between what one might think of as the true meaning of an event or an object and how it is presented in the media.
But it's important to note for our discussions here that a stereotype is actually not only based on an abstract idea, but is an invention in media. The stereotype was a type of letterpress that was used to make reproducing copies a quicker process. We can look at the castle as an invention in media, like a phone or a shoe or a stereotype. One way to do this is to look at the castle through Jeremy Bentham's design of the Panopticon.
He devoted most of his efforts to developing a design for a Panopticon prison, which he described as a new mode of obtaining, quote-unquote, power of mind over mind. The design concept consisted of a circular structure with an inspection house at the center. From this vantage point, the staff of the institution could watch the inmates housed around the perimeter without their knowledge of being watched. A real prison based on Bentham's design was never built. However, there are 25 prisons internationally that are Panopticon-inspired, including one in Illinois.
The castle was a typical medieval design. You can see on the floor plan where the towers at the corners stuck out. This was to protect the castle from a military attack, but also the corners acted a little like a panopticon, enabling a regime of surveillance over the town it overlooked. The locals would have been seen as a potential threat, especially after they had stormed the castle whilst it was being built, and therefore needed to be watched. Imagine what it would have been like to sense those towers watching you. This architectural and cultural regime would have affected both the behavior of the Portuguese, the inhabitants of the castle, and the locals, setting up a binary, a symbolic and physical difference, the physical barrier of a brick wall. The castle automatically criminalized the locals in anticipation that they may revolt.
Hi, my name is Adrian. I am working at the castle. I answer phones, answering questions and setting appointments for like plumbing and stuff. I like talking on the phone. It's just that I just don't like talking all day. Some people call with an attitude.
The castle itself was brought over to Ghana from Portugal in parts. One historical account suggested that red bricks, doors, arches, and window frames were prefabricated in Portugal and shipped by sea. The castle design was repeated along the Gold Coast and elsewhere. It became the original from which others were copied. The Canadian media theorist Marshall McLuhan can be brought up now. In his book, Understanding Media, 1964, he famously defined the medium as the message itself. For McLuhan, the properties of the medium, like, for example, a cell phone, impacts the human experience and society not just because of what information we receive on the phone, but how the phone determines the way in which we receive it. He also argued that the content of a medium is always another medium. So the content of text messages, for example, is in fact the medium of binary code expressed through an alphabetical symbol structure on your phone screen. In the case of the castle, one of the messages of the castle was another castle in a sense, but also the idea of the castle as a technology for producing a boundary and a surveillance regime, being watched by the red of the brick wall.
You see, it doesn't much matter what you say on the telephone. The telephone as a service is a huge environment, and that is the medium. And the environment affects everybody. What you say on the telephone affects very few. And the same with radio or any other medium. What you print is nothing compared to the effect of the printed word. The printed word sets up a paradigm, a structure of awareness which affects everybody in very, very drastic ways, and it doesn't very much matter what you print as long as you go on with that form of activity.
Hey, Pops, better help?
Say what?
The castle was a storage device, much like a cell phone. There are early documents that show workers who logged a stocktake inside the castle. The increase in quantities that the storage allowed contributed to the expansion of trading and produced more wealth for the Europeans. The castle at this time was engaged in slavery, but as gold increased, so did slavery and the expansion of the transatlantic slave trade. The aspect of storing goods expanded to the imprisoning of slaves, and they were treated as goods to be stored. In 1637, the castle was taken over by the Dutch. The slave trade started to expand at this point. The enslaved were imprisoned in rooms in the castle, much like the way goods were stored previously. For the German media theorist Friedrich Hitler, all media are systems of storage, processing and transmission of information. The castle could store not only goods and people, but also the technology and culture of castling itself that was essential to the development of slavery as a historical event and is globally reproduced.
Yeah. I got my badge. It's time to start working now.
Another Another significant aspect of how the castle came about and contributes to castling is perspective. Perspective is a technology that the German media theorist Bernhard Segal argues was already contained in early maps. During the Renaissance period, the techniques of perspective was developed as a way to try and represent reality accurately. However, perspective is not reality itself. It is a technique of representation, an illusion, a cultural technique that artificially positions the human eye at the center of its surroundings and therefore creates an ambiguous culture of objectivity and scientific truth. Segal argues that early maps were based on methods of projection, where the human eye was important, projecting the human forward along the longitude and latitude of lines to discover lands until then untouched by Europeans. Furthermore, the technique of perspective also utilized the technology of the grid. These techniques put the subject in the center of the globe that could be divided up and conquered. There is a connection between the map that helped the Portuguese discover and exploit the Gold Coast, the development of the Western self-determined individual subject, and the individual human-centered perspective that it can be argued started in the map, and the ships that brought the Portuguese and the first castle that they built. It could be argued that what contributed to the development of slave trade was articulated in relation to the mediums of perspective and cartography, where the development of the conquering subject was brought out, putting them, us, at the center of the globe. Everything that was in the way of the conquering line of perspective could be taken over simply by moving forward. Such a system othered the indigenous populations in their own lands and turned them into subjects to be gazed upon, divided them up under the prism of a commercial grid, and made them into commodities to be exchanged for gold.
Well, since the castle here anyways, we might as well take the opportunity of the jobs they have available for us, like inventory, being a loader. You can even be a manager of the warehouse, even a security guard for the ones that's in the tower watching us. A little extra money to put in your pocket. Who don't need that?
The castle structured the relationship between the village and the global trade industry, the colonized and the colonizers. It did so through specific cultural techniques, some of which I have just described, from the surveillance of the other through architectural and visual elements, to the castle as a storage device of both goods and people, and as a storage and transmission device of the very cultural techniques necessary for expanding capitalism itself, creating subjects to transmit the castle. Elmina Castle still stands today and is a memory of that past. While the system of slavery no longer formally exists, the self-determined individual is still a powerful part of culture today, perhaps even more than before. Elmina Castle has become a tourist destination. People visit the castle in a process of shaping themselves in a complex relationship of presence, individualism, and self-surveillance. Okay, so last night the castle got stormed. The castle basically got destroyed. As you can see, the castle got raided last night.
So we went to the castle the other day, and we ran through there like a tornado because they're trying to build a castle where my ancestors were buried, a cemetery. So that's why I took a lot of their materials, and they think they're going to build a castle on my ancestors? Well, they're going to be missing a lot of pieces.
Thank you.
Okay, so I thought I would start by just asking one question and then kind of get the ball rolling, and then we'll open out for audience questions. So for this exhibition at MOCAD, Danielle made a whole kind of installation component centered on the video. So the presentation she just gave was about a 2-channel video that is basically the anchor for this exhibition. So around that, she has built a new installation environment, and all of the installation components are made from cardboard. And it's the same kind of commercially fabricated cardboard that is used a lot in commercial advertising. So for the kinds of sort of pop-up displays near registers at grocery stores, or for commercial shipments, this kind of thing. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about how that installation environment and the cardboard actually that it's made from relates to these ideas that you were talking about.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about how the castle, well, the historical narrative of the castle was about it being a moment of, I was interested in the fact that it was like 1482, which is so long ago, but it was suggested that this castle was like partly made already in Portugal and then shipped to Ghana. And so I was interested in this relationship between that being like a moment of moving, like a material that has like a kind of information in it. So it's like a colonial, I don't know how to explain it. It's like a material moment of colonialism. And then so I thought it was interesting to relate that to how marketing and advertising relates to the way that it kind of informs our environment and is also a way of moving information, or yeah, it's like not innocent, it's like a part of another form of colonial present. I don't know if that explains. Maybe more simply, like literally materials that move around in a global way.
Right. And also, so Danielle has a background in advertising, commercial advertising, that has informed a lot of her work over the last several years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. In how long ago was that? I think when did I start? Like 2006, I was working in advertising, and so one of my jobs was to make window displays. So we would use some of the strategies that we did for this installation, like literally make an environment with cardboard. And so I'm definitely influenced by that. And it was a lot to do with, I mean, the funny thing is that this is a one-off, but usually it's about producing many, right? So that they can move around to many stores, and so you have this multiple of information. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a really wonderful way in which her exhibition brings together really disparate forms of media, so including maps that she has redrawn by hand and used as the basis for these installation components that I was describing. So there's that kind of like reiterative process, which already historically was a reiterative process because the in the colonial era, these maps were created first drawn by hand and then most often reproduced through print media, so etching, for example. So it's through the repetition of these images that the idea about Elmina and about Africa and other colonial places and the European presence there got formulated and circulated literally through that media.
Through the media, exactly.
So creating this really great parallel and a metaphor really between the castle and the print media and their circulation through other media, including advertising and, what do you call it, like digital media. And it becomes this really thick conglomeration that draws out a lot of really kind of wide and deep implications.
Yes. You said it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Well, do you want to take some questions from the audience?
Go ahead. Any questions?
We have a microphone.
First of all, just such a great, the performative nature of your lecture was just amazing, but then also just kind of the compilation of all these images and materials, just something I'll definitely think about. But I was very taken with what struck me as kind of this, not a pessimistic look at tourism. So I was really interested in how you're commenting on people who make the voyage to Elmina Castle, and they see it as a way of kind of reconnecting with this history, but at the same time kind of using their mobile phones as a way to document their participation in this commemorative act of going to see this site. And then at the same time, they're kind of also being surveilled as they're doing this commemorative act. So could you just talk a little bit more about how you see the tourism industry at Elmina? Like, is it working for good? Is it working for bad? I mean, I'm sure it's definitely a mixture of the two, but.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that completely because it's super complicated, and I haven't even actually made it to the castle myself, and so I can't speak to what it must feel like to be there. But I think that in terms of the way in which I was thinking about it in the work, I was interested in it being this moment of recognizing the individual or your individual self in relation to this history, and how the cell phone is this media or this thing that allows you to do that, and that it goes into circulation, and it's really about you being, I'm present, and I'm present in relation to this history. And so I don't necessarily see it as good or bad as such. I think that it's more just describing how that is happening and how it relates to history, and that maybe understanding that might allow it to be something that has a potential, because I think there is a potential in the way we use cell phones, but if it remains only in this forming of an identity as an individual, then maybe that's not so interesting. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming, and grab a booklet if you did.